The Golden Cage. The marble floors of the Blackwood mansion gleamed under crystal chandeliers, reflecting the cold emptiness that had settled over the household like morning frost. Marcus Blackwood stood in his study, staring out at the manicured gardens where his 22-year-old daughter Sophia once played as a child. Now those same gardens felt more like prison walls. She refused the internship at Goldman Sachs again. His assistant Janet reported from behind him, clutching a tablet against her chest. The third one this month. Marcus didn't turn around. His reflection in the window showed a man who had everything money could buy: power, influence, respect, yet somehow felt like he was losing the one thing that mattered most. What did she say? That she'd rather clean toilets than work in another corporate tower that looks down on real people. A bitter laugh escaped Marcus's lips. Sophia had always been defiant, but lately her rebellion had taken on a sharper edge. She questioned everything he'd built, everything he stood for. Their dinner conversations had become battlegrounds, where his business achievements were dismissed as exploitation of the working class, and his charitable donations were called guilt money. "Sir, there's something else," Janet hesitated. "Security reported that she's been researching bus routes to small towns. Rural areas mostly. Places where nobody would recognize the Blackwood name," Marcus finished, finally turning around. His dark eyes, the same shade as Sophia's, held a mixture of frustration and fear. He'd spent 20 years building an empire worth $12 billion, yet he couldn't figure out how to bridge the growing chasm between himself and his only child. The irony wasn't lost on him. Marcus had grown up poor, working 3 jobs to put himself through college. He'd built Blackwood Industries from a single construction contract into a multinational corporation. Every luxury in this house, from the imported Italian marble to the Picasso in the dining room, represented years of sacrifice and determination. He'd wanted to give Sophia everything he never had. Instead, she saw it as a burden. That evening, Marcus found Sophia in the library reading a worn copy of On the Road by Jack Kerouac. She looked up as he entered, her long, dark hair falling across her shoulders like a curtain she could hide behind. "We need to talk," he said, settling into the leather chair across from her. "If this is about the Goldman Sachs thing, I already told Janet, it's not about Goldman Sachs." Marcus leaned forward, genuinely trying to understand. "Sophie, help me here. What is it you want? Name it, and it's yours. Want to travel? I'll buy you a jet. Want to study art? I'll donate to build you a private studio." Sophia closed her book, her fingers tracing the faded cover. "That's exactly the problem, Dad. You think everything can be bought. You think throwing money at something makes it meaningful. Money provides opportunities. Money provides shortcuts," she interrupted. "Do you know what I want? I want to earn something myself. I want to know what it feels like to work for minimum wage, to worry about rent, to have a boss who doesn't know my last name. I want to matter because of what I do, not because of what you've done." Marcus felt something cold settle in his stomach. "You're talking about throwing your life away." "I'm talking about finding my life." Sophia stood up, the book clutched against her chest like armor. "Every job I've ever had, every school I've attended, every friend I've made, they all knew I was Marcus Blackwood's daughter first. I'm 22 years old and I've never once been just Sophie." As she walked toward the door, Marcus called after her. "The world out there isn't kind to naive rich girls playing at being poor." Sophia paused at the threshold. Looking back with eyes that held a determination he recognized, it was the same look he'd worn when building his empire. "Then maybe it's time I stopped being a rich girl," she said quietly, and left him sitting alone among his expensive books and empty victories. The Great Escape 3 weeks later, Sophia walked into Rosie's diner in the small town of Cedar Falls with nothing but a backpack, $200 in cash and a fake ID that read Sophie Miller. The bell above the door chimed as she entered, and the smell of bacon grease and fresh coffee enveloped her like a warm hug. Rosie Martinez, a woman in her 50s with salt and pepper hair pulled back in a practical bun, looked up from wiping down the counter. Her weathered hands and kind eyes spoke of decades spent serving others. and Sophia felt an immediate sense of authenticity she'd never encountered in her father's world of polished executives and artificial smiles. "You the girl who called about the waitress job?" Rosie asked, her voice carrying a slight Spanish accent. "Yes, ma'am. Sophie Miller." The name felt strange on her tongue, but also liberating. For the first time in her life, she wasn't Marcus Blackwood's daughter. She was just Sophie. Rosie studied her carefully, taking in the designer jeans that Sophia had tried to make look worn, the manicured nails she'd attempted to chip, and the nervous energy that radiated from every pore. "You ever waited tables before, honey?" "No, but I'm a fast learner." "I need this job." The desperation in Sophia's voice was real, even if her circumstances weren't quite what they seemed. Pays minimum wage plus tips. Shifts are long. Customers can be difficult, and your feet will hurt like hell for the first month. "You still interested?" Sophia nodded eagerly. More than interested. Grateful. Meanwhile, 200 miles away in his Manhattan penthouse, Marcus paced like a caged animal. The private investigator he'd hired sat across from him, scrolling through reports on his tablet. "She's covered her tracks well," Detective Ray Thompson admitted. "Used cash to buy a bus ticket, ditched her phone, and her credit cards haven't been used since she left." "It's like she just vanished." "People don't just vanish," Marcus snapped. "She's my daughter, not a ghost. Sir, with respect, your daughter is an adult. If she doesn't want to be found, she's naive and privileged. She has no idea what the real world is like." Marcus stopped pacing and fixed Thompson with a stare that had intimidated Fortune 500 CEOs. "I don't care what it costs. Find her." Back at Rosie's diner, Sophia was discovering that the real world was both harder and more rewarding than she'd imagined. Her first day was a disaster. She spilled coffee on 3 customers, forgot orders, and nearly collapsed from exhaustion after an 8-hour shift. But something magical happened when Mrs. Chen, an elderly regular, patted her hand and said, "You'll get the hang of it, sweetheart. We all start somewhere." It was the first time anyone had encouraged her without knowing her bank balance. "Not bad for day one," said Tommy Rodriguez, the cook, as Sophia counted her tips at the end of her shift. $23.47 had never felt more valuable than the $1,000 allowance she used to receive weekly. By the end of her first week, Sophia had found a rhythm. She rented a tiny studio apartment above the hardware store, furnished it with thrift store finds, and discovered the simple pleasure of cooking her own meals. Her hands grew rough from carrying heavy plates, her back ached from long hours on her feet, but her heart felt lighter than it had in years. She made friends with her co-workers, people who knew nothing about trust funds or board meetings, who judged her solely on her ability to remember their coffee preferences and smile through difficult shifts. Maria, a single mother working 2 jobs, became her closest friend, teaching her everything from proper table-clearing techniques to the best laundromat in town. "You're different from most girls your age," Maria observed one evening as they cleaned up after the dinner rush. "Older somehow, like you've seen things." If only she knew, Sophia thought, but simply smiled and continued stacking plates. For the first time in her life, Sophia felt truly alive. Every dollar earned, every satisfied customer, every small victory was entirely her own. She wasn't living in her father's shadow or benefiting from his reputation. She was just Sophie Miller, waitress at Rosie's diner, and it felt like the most honest version of herself she'd ever been. Collision of 2 worlds 6 weeks into her new life. Sophia had found her groove at Rosie's diner. She could balance 4 plates on her left arm, remember complex orders without writing them down, and had earned the respect of both her co-workers and regular customers. The girl who once had panic attacks about which charity gala dress to wear now confidently handled the breakfast rush without breaking a sweat. It was a Tuesday morning when everything changed. Marcus sat in the back seat of his black Mercedes, reviewing contracts as his driver navigated the winding roads toward Cedar Falls. He was en route to inspect a potential acquisition, a small manufacturing plant that would be perfect for his latest expansion. The town was insignificant, the kind of place he usually flew over rather than drove through, but due diligence required a personal visit. Should be about 10 more minutes. Sir, his driver James called back. Fine. Stop somewhere for coffee when we get there. I need to make some calls before the meeting. Sophia was refilling the coffee station when she heard the distinctive purr of an expensive engine pulling into the diner's gravel parking lot. Through the window, she watched a sleek black car that looked wildly out of place among the pickup trucks and economy sedans that usually filled their lot. Looks like we got ourselves a fancy customer, Tommy called from the kitchen, grinning. Sophie, you're up. Rich folks tip better, Sophia laughed, straightening her apron. Rich people aren't that different from anyone else, Tommy. They still need their caffeine fix. She was wiping down table 6 when the bell chimed. Without looking up, she called out, Seat yourself anywhere you'd like. I'll be right with you. Thank you. The voice stopped her cold. Deep, familiar. Carrying the weight of authority she'd heard command boardrooms and intimidate competitors. Sophia's hands froze on the table, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. Slowly, she raised her eyes. Marcus Blackwood stood in the doorway of Rosie's diner, his $1,000 suit a stark contrast to the checkered linoleum and vinyl booths. For a moment, father and daughter stared at each other across an impossible divide, he in his world of power and privilege, she in her chosen realm of honest work and simple purpose. The coffee pot slipped from Sophia's numb fingers, shattering against the floor in an explosion of ceramic and hot liquid. The entire diner fell silent, conversations halting mid-sentence as every eye turned toward the drama unfolding by table 6. Sophie? Rosie's voice cut through the tension. Honey, you okay? But Sophia couldn't speak, couldn't move. The life she'd carefully built over the past 6 weeks, the friendships, the independence, the sense of self-worth she'd earned one tip at a time, suddenly felt as fragile as the broken coffee pot at her feet. Marcus's expression cycled through shock, disbelief, and something that looked dangerously like fury. His gaze took in his daughter's stained apron, her work-worn hands, the name tag that read Sophie in cheerful red letters. When he spoke, his voice was barely controlled. What the hell are you doing? I'm working, Sophia whispered, finally finding her voice. Working? The word came out like a curse. You're my daughter, my heir. You're supposed to be... Supposed to be what, Dad? Another pretty decoration in your perfect life? Another asset in your portfolio? Sophia's voice grew stronger, fed by weeks of newfound confidence. I'm exactly where I want to be. The other customers had stopped pretending not to stare. Maria appeared at Sophia's shoulder, a protective gesture that wasn't lost on Marcus. Rosie stepped forward, her maternal instincts clearly activated by the tension radiating between the two strangers in her diner. Sir, I don't know what your relationship is with Sophie, but she's one of my best employees. If you have a problem with her, you can take it outside. Marcus looked at Rosie as if she were an insect that had dared to speak. This is my daughter. The words hit the diner like a bomb. Maria gasped, her hand flying to cover her mouth. Tommy dropped his spatula in the kitchen. Even old Mr. Henderson, who'd been reading his paper in corner booth for the past hour, looked up with wide eyes. Your daughter? Rosie's voice was incredulous as she looked. Between the billionaire in his expensive suit and the young woman who'd been serving coffee and scrambled eggs with genuine humility for over a month, Sophia felt the weight of every gaze, every whispered conversation that would follow this moment. The carefully constructed life of Sophie Miller was crumbling, and with it, the freedom she'd worked so hard to earn. Yes, Marcus said, his voice carrying across the silent diner. And she's coming home with me, right now. Unexpected lessons. The silence in the diner stretched like a taut wire, threatening to snap under the weight of unspoken truths. Sophia stood amid the shattered coffee pot, her chin raised in defiance, despite the tears threatening to spill down her cheeks. I'm not going anywhere, she said, her voice steady despite the chaos in her heart. Marcus stepped forward, his polished shoes crunching on ceramic fragments. Don't be ridiculous. You've had your little adventure, now it's time to come home and take responsibility for your future. This isn't an adventure, Dad. This is my life. Sophia gestured around the diner at the people who had become her chosen family. These people know me, the real me, not the trust fund princess you created, but who I actually am. You're living in poverty when you could have everything. I don't want everything. The words exploded from Sophia with such force that Marcus actually stepped back. I want something. One thing that's mine, that I earned, that matters. Maria moved closer to Sophia, her protective stance speaking volumes about the bonds that had formed over late-night shifts and shared struggles. Mr. Blackwood, with all due respect, your daughter has worked harder than anyone I know. She's earned the right to make her own choices. Marcus turned his cold gaze on Maria, and Sophia saw him as her co-workers must. A powerful man used to buying cooperation, intimidating opposition, and treating people as obstacles to be removed. The realization made her stomach turn. And you are? Maria Santos. I work with Sophie. She's my friend. Your friend. Marcus spoke the word as if it tasted bitter. Do you have any idea who you're talking to? I could buy this entire town and everyone in it. The cruelty of the statement hung in the air like smoke. Sophia watched the faces around her. Good people who worked honest jobs, who struggled to pay their bills, who treated each other with dignity despite having little money. She saw them through her father's eyes for the first time, and the shame nearly crushed her. But then something unexpected happened. Old Mr. Henderson stood up from his corner booth, his arthritic hands steady as he pulled out his wallet. He placed a $5 bill on his table, double what his coffee and toast had cost, and looked directly at Marcus. Maybe you can buy the town, son, but you can't buy what that girl's got. Respect. That's something you earn, one cup of coffee at a time. One by one, other customers began standing. Mrs. Chen placed money on her table. The construction workers from Table 3 did the same. Even teenagers on their way to school emptied their pockets of crumpled bills and loose change. Tommy emerged from the kitchen, still wearing his grease-stained apron, and stood beside Rosie. Sophie's family here, he said simply. Family protects each other. Marcus looked around the diner, seeing something he hadn't expected. Loyalty that couldn't be purchased, community that couldn't be acquired, and love that couldn't be leveraged. These people were defending his daughter not because of who she was, but because of who she'd chosen to become. For the first time in decades, Marcus Blackwood felt small. Sophia watched her father's face, seeing something shift behind his eyes. The anger was still there, but it was joined by something else. Confusion, perhaps, or recognition. The man, who had built an empire by reading people and situations, was clearly struggling to understand what he was witnessing. "Dad," she said softly, her voice cutting through the tension. "I know you think I'm throwing my life away, but I've never been more myself than I am right here, in this diner, with these people. Can't you see that?" Marcus looked at his daughter. Really? Looked at her. For the first time since walking through the door. He saw the confidence in her posture, the genuine affection in the eyes of her co-workers, the sense of belonging that radiated from her despite her stained uniform and tired feet. And slowly, something began to crack in the armor he'd built around his heart. "I see it," he whispered, so quietly that only Sophia heard him. "I see it, and I don't understand it." Sophia stepped toward him, careful to avoid the broken ceramic. "Then maybe it's time you learned." What happened next shocked everyone in the diner, including Marcus himself. Instead of demanding his daughter leave, instead of flexing his wealth and power, he did something completely unprecedented. He removed his expensive watch, loosened his silk tie, and rolled up his sleeves. "Show me," he said. A new beginning. The sight of Marcus Blackwood sweeping up broken ceramic while wearing a $1,000 suit became the story that Cedar Falls would tell for generations. But for Sophia, watching her father awkwardly handle a mop while Rosie patiently explained the proper technique, it was the moment her world began to make sense. "You're holding it wrong," Tommy called from the kitchen, unable to hide his grin. Gotta put some muscle into it, boss man. Marcus paused, sweat beading on his forehead despite the diner's air conditioning. Boss man? That's what we call folks who think they know everything about everything, Tommy replied with a wink at Sophia. Don't worry, it usually wears off after a few hours of real work. The first day was painful for everyone involved. Marcus burned himself on the coffee pot, dropped a full tray of dishes, and received his first customer complaint when he argued with a regular about the inefficient way they ordered their eggs. But he stayed. Every time Sophia expected him to storm out, to call his lawyer, or to simply buy the diner to shut it down, he surprised her by asking what to do next. Why aren't you leaving? She asked him during their break, watching as he examined his soft hands, now marked with small cuts and burns. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the parking lot where his Mercedes sat like an alien spacecraft among the pickup trucks. Because for the first time in 20 years, I'm seeing you happy, really happy. And I realized I don't know how to do that. Do what? Be happy, just happy. Not successful, not powerful, not respected, just happy. He turned to look at her, and Sophia saw vulnerability in his eyes that she'd never witnessed before. I've spent so many years building things, acquiring things, controlling things, that I forgot how to just be with people. Over the following days, something remarkable happened. Marcus began to understand the rhythm of the diner, the unspoken kindness between co-workers, the satisfaction of earning respect through actions rather than reputation. He learned that Mrs. Chen was a retired professor who had fled Vietnam with nothing but hope, that Tommy sent half his paycheck to support his disabled sister, and that Rosie had built her diner from a food truck and a dream. These people have stories, he told Sophia one evening as they walked to her tiny apartment. Real stories. Not the sanitized biographies I read about business partners, but actual human experiences. That's what I tried to tell you, Sophia replied, unlocking her door. Money doesn't make stories more valuable. It just makes them louder. The transformation wasn't instant or complete. Marcus still occasionally tried to solve problems with his checkbook, still struggled to understand why someone would choose struggle over security. But he began to see the dignity in honest work, the joy in earning respect rather than demanding it. On his 10th day at the diner, Marcus made a decision that would change both their lives forever. I'm restructuring Blackwood Industries, he announced over dinner in Sophia's cramped kitchen, starting with profit sharing for all employees, not just executives. And we're implementing a program where every executive spends 1 month each year working entry-level positions in our partner companies. Sophia nearly choked on her pasta. You're serious? Dead serious. If I'm going to run companies that affect people's lives, I should understand what those lives actually look like. Marcus looked around her modest apartment, taking in the thrift store furniture and homemade decorations. I also want you to design the program. Not as my daughter, but as someone who understands what it means to start from nothing. And if I want to keep working here? Marcus smiled. Not the calculated business smile she'd grown up seeing, but something genuine and warm. Then I'll keep working here too. Turns out I'm a pretty decent dishwasher when I put my mind to it. 6 months later, Rosie's Diner had become an unlikely training ground for corporate executives. A place where million-dollar decisions were made over coffee refills and honest conversation. Marcus still ran his empire, but he did it with calloused hands and a deeper understanding of the people his choices affected. Sophia never returned to her old life, but she didn't need to escape from her father anymore either. They had found something better than the relationship they'd lost. They had found a friendship built on mutual respect and shared purpose, and sometimes, late at night when the diner was closed and they were finishing the cleanup, Marcus would catch himself humming while he mopped floors, genuinely happy for the first time in decades. It turned out that the most valuable thing he'd ever acquired wasn't a company or a contract. It was the respect of his daughter and the knowledge that wealth meant nothing if it couldn't be shared. With people who mattered, the golden cage had been opened, and both father and daughter had learned to fly.